Have you ever wondered why over time, being around certain people has become more tiring than pleasurable? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most influential philosophers in history, believed that loneliness was not a defect, but a virtue reserved for the sharpest minds. For him, socializing often requires superficiality. We force smiles, mold ourselves to artificial standards, and in the end, we leave drained and exhausted. If you feel that you prefer the tranquility of silence to the hustle and bustle of social gatherings, there's a reason for that. And no, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. On the contrary, it can be a sign of intelligence, maturity, and self-reliance. Today we're going to explore 7 philosophical and psychological reasons that explain why some people simply prefer to avoid social contact. And by the end of this video, you may realize that Schopenhauer was right all along. 1. You are highly sensitive to your surroundings. The world is in constant motion, a whirlwind of noise, voices, and distractions. For many, this is just the background sound of everyday life, a confusing but harmless symphony. However, for those with a more sensitive and observant mind, this excess is not just an insignificant detail, but a source of discomfort and wear and tear. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most perceptive critics of human nature, warned that the more refined the mind, the greater its ability to perceive what others ignore. The average person moves through the world without noticing the cacophony of empty words, the falsehood embedded in certain smiles, or the emptiness of conversations that add nothing. For them, noise is a mere component of the environment. But for those who are more attentive, those who see beyond the surface, every sound, every gesture, and every interaction carries a weight that is hard to bear. Sensitivity to the environment is not a defect, but a sign that your mind works on a different level. While others seek distractions and interactions to fill their time, you seek meaning. And for this very reason, the presence of certain people, of certain places, can become overwhelming. You notice what isn't said. You notice empty expressions. You feel the energy of the surroundings more intensely than you would like. And that can be exhausting. Schopenhauer said that crowds are a burden to those who think deeply. This is because human conviviality is often based on superficiality, words exchanged without reflection, social gatherings motivated by the fear of loneliness, conversations that only circle around the obvious. For someone who longs for depth, all this becomes a source of frustration. It's not a question of antipathy or arrogance, but of an essential difference in the way we exist in the world. There are those who feed on noise and chaos, and those who find peace in the order of silent thought. If you feel that certain environments drain your energy, that excessive noise and empty interactions are exhausting, it doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. On the contrary, it could mean that you value what really matters, and that you refuse to waste your serenity amid the chaos of mediocrity. So don't blame yourself for craving silence, for choosing less interaction and more introspection. The world may try to convince you that isolation is a problem, but Schopenhauer teaches us that, for some, it is the purest form of freedom. 2. You value your emotional independence. Many people can't stand being alone. They feel an almost instinctive fear of silence, as if the absence of external voices reveals an inner emptiness that they would rather not face. They constantly seek company, approval, and validation. Like invisible puppets, their feelings oscillate according to other people's moods, and without realizing it, they become prisoners of this need for acceptance. But not you. Schopenhauer saw this dependence as a sign of weakness, a burden that only those who haven't learned to live with themselves carry. He believed that those who desperately need other people will never be truly free. And he was right. True freedom doesn't lie in being able to go wherever you want, say what you think, or act without restrictions. True freedom is not needing anyone to be happy. It's knowing that your inner peace isn't for sale, that your emotional state shouldn't be held hostage to the wills and whims of others. If you have learned to appreciate your own company, if you can find pleasure in moments of solitude, it doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It means that you have evolved. Many people fear loneliness because they confuse being alone with feeling abandoned, but there is a huge difference between being alone by choice and feeling alone out of necessity. You have understood that the Company of others may be pleasant, but it is not essential to your existence. And this understanding, as simple as it may seem, is something that few achieve. The modern world encourages constant connection, social media messaging, incessant interaction. Solitude has become almost taboo, as if those who choose it are making a mistake or living an incomplete life. But Schopenhauer saw isolation as a form of clarity, a space where the wisest can reflect without interference. If you realize that you prefer emotional independence to the constant need for company, it means that your happiness is not at the mercy of others. It means that, unlike most people, you have found a state of balance that few are able to achieve. And so loneliness is not a punishment for you, but a privilege. 3. You feel you need to perform around others. From an early age, we learn that social life requires a continuous effort to adapt. We smile even when we don't want to. We feign interest in conversations that bore us. We take part in meetings that leave us exhausted, simply because it's expected. This is the invisible rule of coexistence. To be pleasant, to be accepted, to be functional within the great social theatre. But the more you mature, the less patience you have for this farce. Schopenhauer, always aware of the superficiality of human interactions, said that society is a theatre where few are real. Most people put on masks, act out roles, and live according to the script they've been given, and do so without even questioning it. But what about when you see beyond that? If you feel that you have to act around others, that every interaction requires an artificial effort, it means that your mind has realized something that most people don't want to admit. The world values convenience more than truth. The social expectation is that you fit in, to be nice even when you're tired, that you participate in small talk as if it were essential, that you avoid conflicts, that you are diplomatic, that you never expose feelings that could make the environment uncomfortable. But what if the discomfort is precisely this constant staging? Over time, you realize that other people's masks no longer interest you. What you want is no more pretending, but to experience life authentically. You want conversations that really matter. You want interactions that are genuine, that add value, that go deeper. But superficiality reigns and the social theatre is repeated at every encounter. And when sincerity, depth, and authenticity become rarities, silence becomes an infinitely more dignified alternative. Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. He knew that those who see beyond the social game often prefer solitude to being part of this great farce. If you feel that interactions require too much effort, if being in a crowd wears you out more than it fulfills you, then perhaps you have discovered that true freedom lies in no longer having to act. 4. You have a strong sense of self-sufficiency. Schopenhauer said that the less a person needs others, the more powerful they become. And that's a great truth. Society teaches us all the time that we need each other. From an early age, we learn that group acceptance is essential, that we must seek validation, follow norms, and fit in. Independence is viewed with suspicion. Anyone who prefers to walk alone, who doesn't bend to the need to belong, is soon labeled as strange, cold, distant. But what about when you realize you don't need it? The vast majority of people rely on external distractions to fill the emptiness within. They need conversations, interactions, a constant reaffirmation of their value. They live for the gaze of others. They mold themselves to what is expected of them. They fear silence because it exposes what they are trying to avoid, the need to be enough. But not you. You feel that loneliness doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you. It's not a punishment, but a privilege. You don't see the need for interactions that add nothing, for empty words that only fill time. You've learned that when you have a rich inner world, the presence of other people is a choice, not a necessity. Schopenhauer saw this reality clearly. For him, most people cling to society not out of pleasure, but out of fear. Fear of facing themselves, fear of not being important, fear of discovering that, without others, they are nothing. But if you've experienced the feeling of fullness when you're alone, it means that you've understood something that most people will never understand. It means that you don't need the world to feel complete, because you've already found everything you need within yourself. 5. You've had negative experiences with social interactions. Life teaches. And sometimes it teaches you in the most bitter, way. How many times have we given ourselves over to a friendship or a relationship, believing that there was sincerity there, only to discover that we were used, betrayed, or discarded, without the slightest pang of conscience on the part of the other person? Schopenhauer said that the greatest mistake a man can make is not knowing how to choose his friends. There is no truer piece of advice. A lot of pain could have been avoided if we had seen the signs earlier, if we hadn't given second chances to those who had already shown their true nature. If you've ever been ridiculed, deceived, or ignored, you know the weight of these words. There is no crueler learning experience than the one that comes from disappointment. Over time, you realize that not every friendship is genuine, that many words are empty, that many promises are worthless. People get close out of interest, praise when it suits them, but disappear at the first sign of trouble. And so, little by little, you learn to be more selective. At first, you may have tried to adapt. You may have tried to understand others, to justify behavior, to forgive more than you should. But there comes a time when you get tired of giving to others what you don't get in return. And that's when loneliness begins to seem more attractive than the wrong company. Schopenhauer understood this perfectly. He knew that living with others can be exhausting, and that most human relationships are built more on convenience than true connection. If you've come to this understanding, it means you haven't isolated yourself. You've just protected yourself, because in the end, it's better to be alone than poorly accompanied. 6. You have a low tolerance for empty conversations. Modern society glorifies superficiality. Conversations have become just an excuse to fill the silence, not a means of real connection. People talk because they feel they have to, but rarely say anything worth listening to. Schopenhauer saw this as a great waste. He believed that most conversations are nothing more than an exchange of empty words, purposeless social noise. Few are those who seek out dialogues that really matter, that transcend the obvious, that question and explore something beyond the immediate. If you feel that most interactions are predictable, repetitive, and without substance, there's nothing wrong with you. Perhaps your mind simply craves something that few can offer. The German philosopher believed that the great thinkers were condemned to loneliness precisely because their favorite conversations could not be sustained by the majority of people. While some only discuss the weather, gossip, or trivial events, there are those who seek something deeper, who want to understand the world, explore ideas, reflect on life with an intensity that few understand. But this kind of exchange is rare. And when you realize this, you also realize that many interactions are just a waste of energy. Have you ever found yourself bored in the middle of a conversation? Have you ever felt that your presence there was pointless because nothing was really being said? Have you ever wanted to escape from a social gathering because you felt that your time there would be wasted? This is because your mind has realized that quantity doesn't mean quality. Schopenhauer said that those who have something valuable inside them don't need the noise of the world to feel complete. If you feel disconnected from conventional social interactions, perhaps it's because your mind operates on a different level. And maybe that's why you've discovered that silence is infinitely more valuable than meaningless words. 7. You feel that people drain your energy. It's not a question of misanthropy. It's a question of preservation. Some people demand too much. They drain your patience, your peace, your vital energy. You leave a conversation feeling more tired than when you entered. Not because you've said too much, but because you've had to absorb someone else's weight. Schopenhauer understood that human conviviality can be exhausting, especially when it involves those who live on drama, gossip, and emotional demands. Some people don't just want your company. They want to feed off your attention, your empathy, your mental energy. They pour out their frustrations without asking permission. They demand a presence you never promised. They make your problems a burden. They expect you to carry. And if you feel you need to get away from this, it doesn't mean you're insensitive or selfish. It means that you have learned to recognize the value of your time and peace. Society often confuses availability with kindness. They say we should always be ready to listen, to help, to offer our shoulder, even if it wears us out completely. But Schopenhauer saw this as a trap. He knew that a wise man's energy cannot be wasted on things that add nothing. Time and energy are limited resources, and spending both on people who only take from you, without ever giving back, is a luxury that the wise cannot afford. You're not wrong for wanting to preserve your energy. The world is full of emotional noise and unnecessary conflicts. If you feel that you need to choose your interactions better, if you feel that silence and solitude restore you more than certain company, then that's not a weakness. It's a conscious choice by someone who values their own peace. 9. You have a greater need for personal space. Not everyone finds comfort in constant proximity. For some, being surrounded by people all the time is not synonymous with well-being. It's a burden that consumes energy and robs inner peace. The continuous presence of others can be suffocating. There are those who need space, silence, and moments of introspection to maintain their balance. Solitude, far from being a punishment, is a necessary state for regaining strength and organizing one's thoughts. Schopenhauer saw this need as a sign of self-knowledge. For him, those who understand their own nature don't fear isolation, but value it. The man who has learned to think deeply understands that there are times when solitude is a sanctuary, a space where the mind can expand without interference, where it is possible to reflect without distractions. Most people, however, don't understand this. We live in a world that associates solitude with sadness and silence with discomfort. Those who seek time for themselves are often seen as strangers, as someone who needs to be rescued from their own introspection. But why should always being surrounded by people be the natural state? Schopenhauer believed that those who enjoy solitude aren't empty or cold. They're just people who don't need external noise to feel complete. If you feel that constant social interaction wears you down, if you realize that solitary moments restore you more than meetings and gatherings, it doesn't mean that you reject human conviviality. It just means that you know when solitude is most beneficial, and that is a wisdom that few possess. 10. You've learned that peace is worth more than company. Perhaps Schopenhauer's greatest teaching is this: solitude is not a punishment, but a gift. From an early age, we are taught to fear being alone. The world tells us that happiness lies in being surrounded by friends, in having an active social life, in seeking connections at any cost. Society glorifies the crowd and distrusts those who choose silence. But over time, we realize the truth. The worst loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's being surrounded by those who don't understand you. Nothing is more exhausting than forced interactions. Nothing is lonelier than trying to connect with someone who doesn't speak the same emotional language. Nothing consumes more energy than maintaining relationships that offer nothing but noise. Schopenhauer knew this. He saw society as a big stage where few are authentic. Why force yourself to be part of this theater when there is a more dignified path? If solitude brings peace, then why avoid it? Choosing your own company isn't giving up on the world. It's choosing a world where you have control over your energy and serenity. And that's when you realize that peace is worth more than any company. You don't need crowds to feel complete. You don't need to fill voids with meaningless interactions. If silence gives you more than the voices around you, if being with yourself brings you more happiness than being with others, then you have found something rare, true freedom. Schopenhauer said that the wise always walk alone. And perhaps in the end, loneliness is not the fate of the unhappy, but of those who have finally understood what really matters. If this reflection made sense to you, share your opinion in the comments. Your comment could help others. And to receive more stories and reflections like this, subscribe to the Minutos de Sabiduría channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss out on any new content. Stay well and see you next time.